Hello and welcome to the Magic Mirror podcast. With me today is my co-host 33 Elk.
Hello.
And my other co-host Salubrious Snail.
Howdy.
Today we have a interesting podcast topic. It's how to give advice to players about their deck. The polite way to help them improve their list. We're going to talk about that. And then we'll probably just do a little bit of the question zone as well. And that's kind of it for this episode. But first, we need to thank the sponsor, Card Castle. They're the easy way to sort your collection online. You can use our link in the description to get 1 free month of premium. Thanks to Card Castle for sponsoring the podcast. Elk, you have a sort of specific thing that comes to mind that sparked the idea for this episode?
Yeah, so, man, I sound so mean being like, oh, your help, it's not good enough, but,
Do we not want to start that way?
No, it's fine. What I mean is I feel like I get it more than most, or like, we're sort of a select sample size of people because, we have thousands of people look at our decks. Often we'll get comments being like, have you considered X for your deck? Have you not seen this card? This card would be amazing in this list, right? And I feel like that is not very helpful in the grand scheme of things when you give advice in this format. I am a little bit curious about what kind of advice you get from your fans, like unsolicited deck building advice, like people like being like, have you considered this for your, Thanos deck or your Shroom slide deck? That sort of thing.
It's funny because I actually went through a bunch of suggestions that people were giving for a particular one of my decks just a week ago, because I do get a lot of suggestions on my decks, and some of them are quite helpful, but then some of them are certainly less helpful, so very much a mix.
Yeah. And what about you?
I think that I get the least out of you guys, between the three of us, because I do the least amount of like deck techs. But I had this recently happen to me with my Mina and Den List. That was the video I made on like my high power casual deck. And I think it's really funny. Well, one, there was like a lot of people who were like, yeah, this deck is just like boring green stompy. And a lot of other people were like, this deck looks terrible. What are you talking about? This is like a pre-con. But a lot of the like suggestions for like cards to swap out were sort of like, yeah, almost random. Like, oh, this is just like a good green card, or this is just like a big thing to ramp into. But it didn't seem to like make sense for the deck.
Yeah. So my first little complaint with sort of how advice is sort of given is certainly that I feel like people maybe aren't grasping what the weakness of the deck is. I feel like more often than not, people will suggest synergy pieces when the weakness of the deck isn't synergy. A perfect example of this is my Farrakha deck. I recently cut cards like Tormod, the Desecrator, who makes a zombie whenever a card leaves it.
Guy.
I love Tormod too, but he's just been underperforming recently. I already have enough synergy. I've also cut Amzu, Swarm's Hunger, does a very similar thing. Whenever a card leaves your graveyard, she'll make a insect and put that many 1/1 counters on it equal to its mana value of the card that left. I'll see people recommend Sir Conrad for this deck because Farrakha, I'm exiling a lot of creature cards from my graveyard. Ooh, you get to ping each opponent each time. You're built around Constellation? Hey, what about Grim Guardian? Constellation, whenever an enchantment enters these enchantment creature snakes that I'm making, you'll get to ping each of your opponents for 1. The thing is, I'm activating Farrakha maybe 8 or maybe even 10 times a game maximum, which is just 10 points of life loss, which is ridiculously low when you consider the 3 mana value investment that you're putting into this card. Balemurk Leech also exists. But long story short, that's also assuming that it stays in play the entire time, which it won't. I would much rather draw 10 cards off of a different constellation card. Stuff like this. I am already to the gills with Synergy and Farrakha. Where this deck stumbles the most is with, I would say, removal, which I've sort of been shoring up recently. And I feel like unless you know the whole story of a deck and what is sort of lacking in its owner's eyes, you can't really give proper advice. Now, every so often, you'll give a piece of golden advice. I've gotten good suggestions from Farrakha from random people. It's just that the stars need to align, it almost seems, to sort of get that through.
Yeah, I think a good thing to keep in mind, and I think a good reason to be doing this episode, is that giving advice is something that feels good as somebody who kind of has knowledge about a thing, has a hobby they're into. And so I think with EDH players, being able to give advice feels like kind of climbing the rungs of success. But then people are going to be at varying levels of experience with the game. They're also going to be at varying levels of, how much did they engage with your deck? Is this their, just looked at the list for 2 minutes suggestion? Or is this their, okay, I spent, 20 minutes watching the video and then I pondered it in the shower for 20 more minutes. And then here's where I'm, giving you my thoughts. And I'm guessing for the better advice out there, it's going to be, advice that had a lot more intentionality like that in it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people also need to take into account their metagame versus like general advice. Again, with my Mina and Den list, I had a few comments from some people that were like, hey, I tried this out and this deck seems terrible. I keep losing to combo. And then I told them, well, if your meta is very combo heavy, yeah, this deck is bad. It loses to combo. That's its weakness. I played against a lot of blue control, so it was very tuned for blue control. But this isn't like... no deck can be a one-to-one transition into every metagame, So when you give advice like, oh, I think the X card is really good because I see this all the time, it might not even translate, even if it's not bad advice.
Yeah, I think you've really hit close to what I'm trying to say here in the terms of your deck that you made, Mina and Den, is very weak to combo. And that's a weakness that your deck has, and you're fine with that. But someone looking outside in could be like, oh man, this deck, how about another big Eldrazi to ramp into, right? Or what about this landfall card? You seem to be putting a lot of lands into play. Or what about these modal double face cards that you can bounce back to your hand with Mina and Den's ability, where you're not searching for synergy per se, but if you're moving to a combo heavy meta, you're instead looking for maybe cards or effects that are stacks pieces to help slow the combo player down, stuff like this, where from the outside in, someone might be like, oh, here's some cool synergy for Mina and Den, where your really need is something else to shore up a weakness of the deck, right? And maybe that's not something that really registers to someone who's looking outside in on the deck list or who hasn't piloted it before.
Yeah, I think there are also some cases where what it seems like should be good for a deck isn't what it actually is, or it's just kind of a little bit misleading in that way. Like my Francisco Malcolm deck is a Time Civ combo deck. Time Civ is the core card of the deck. So, when I made a video about it, I got lots of suggestions about how I could protect my Time Civ and bring back my Time Civ. When Malcolm is the weak point of the deck, period. But, that's not necessarily apparent unless you've seen it in action, or unless you've played it, or unless you've seen how people respond to it. And that's just not something people are going to be able to see, just kind of looking at, a deck where the front and center piece is Time Civ.
So I think also, I really want to put this out there really quick. I think that almost all advice online on our decks, on anyone's decks, is most likely coming in good faith. Like, these people are not like evil for suggesting things, right? It's a game. You want to feel like, like validated for, like, ooh, I have this sick idea that I want to pass by you, right? Like, this is all advice coming from a good place, I imagine. It's just that I feel like a lot of it is misguided in a way, in terms of like, I feel like a lot of times people are trying to show off their like synergy muscles, being like, oh, look at this cool combo with your commander that I saw, or this cool like effect that I saw with your commander, where maybe that's not something you're trying to go for per se either. Anyway, that's sort of...
I want to...
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So to push further onto what you said there, I do agree that obviously none of it's like bad advice in the sense that it's poorly... it's made to make your deck worse or whatever. There's no bad actors here. But actually, not to, just to make this podcast not us all just agreeing. Other than my Mina and Den list, which is a deck that I've spent a long time working on, and it's a really tight list, I don't think there's many reasonable changes to be made. I actually think I've gotten really, really good advice from at least my audience when I'm like streaming and doing like brewing streams, and I'm just like coming up with different like deck ideas and stuff. Especially because that's when synergy is more relevant to suggest, because I'm like putting together a list or coming up with new ideas for a deck. But I've found that actually the advice given by at least people who are in my live stream has been pretty good. And a lot of the synergy pieces are great options that I ended up actually using in some of my decks.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you're going out on a public stage, I think you're sort of feeling for actual like audience participation in these sorts of things where it's like, do you guys know any good synergy pieces for this deck? And when you ask that question up front and you sort of probe in that manner, you're getting the advice that you want. And this isn't really me searching for advice or like, like that, that's not what I'm talking about here. It's like, I've put my deck list out in the world. Here's my Farrakha deck. And then people are coming into the comments and being like, have you considered this card, this card, this card? People don't realize maybe that Commander, you can only have 100 cards in a deck sometimes, because I feel like there's a lot of right answers to a deck. Putting Tormod into Farrakha is not a bad suggestion. It does what the deck wants. It's just when you have enough payoffs for this strategy, Tormod, for me, is not perhaps the most efficient of those payoffs, but for someone else who might be doing more graveyard back and forth with cards that aren't creatures, because Tormod can trigger on any card leaving the graveyard, that could be more applicable for their deck. Whereas for my deck, where I'm mostly just taking creatures out of my graveyard instead of just any card in general, Tormod would be less of an option for me. I think there can be up to 150, 200 correct answers for a deck, but you only have 100 slots. And in the world where you're recommending cards, you also need to come with enough cuts to accommodate the cards that you are adding. Anyway, back to your point. Sorry, I went on a little tangent there about the live stream stuff. I also do deck review live streams every Sunday on Twitch TV/33 elk, 33_elk, I think, actually, where I sort of open it up to my chat and the person who made the deck. I ask the person who made the deck what they want, what their budget is, if there's anything lacking or anything they need. And then with those parameters, I open it up to the chat. And I feel like that's a way better metric to look through a deck, is with context, with this sort of idea of like what needs repair in the terms of the owner of the deck, because no one knows the deck better than the person who made it and the person who's played with it a lot. You know what I mean?
So I know you mentioned earlier that people kind of are trying to flex their synergy muscles. And I think there's definitely something to that's people's first instinct. What do you think would be a good instinct for people to try and replace that with, I suppose, or maybe modify it if, say, somebody else is coming to them looking for feedback? Somebody says, my deck is doing this, my deck is underperforming, or even if they just see somebody's deck underperforming, in the wild for a couple games, and it seems like the person might be looking to figure out something.
Yeah, I there's a lot of really that's actually a really good question, because it's one thing to sort of point out like, ooh, this is like not maybe the best constructive stuff, and maybe instead talking about how to better critique decks, which is for me anyway. I think the best method is perhaps if there's no like solicited advice, you could instead perhaps say, this is a really cool build. I'm pondering a build about, instead of running these cards, what would you think of that? Instead of sort of phrasing it as like your deck, have you considered this instead of this? Or have you considered these cards for your deck? Instead, maybe posturing it in a more self-reflective way. Like, I want to build this deck. What do you think about these cards instead of these cards? Or maybe something along the lines of, instead of examining and adding synergy, maybe looking instead, hey, your mana base is really lacking here.
No, I've done basically that with there was a guy in my old locals. he played a Henzi deck, and dude was like always he could never get all 3 colors of his mana. Like his deck would 1 out of every like 5 games would play normally, and then every other time he'd be like, "Oh, I have 6 black sources and no green or red." I don't know how that happened all the time, but I remember saying like, this was when like the Painlands got like reprinted, and I was like, "Hey, have you guys seen the new full art Painlands? They look really cool, and those original ones are super cheap now, you know." And then I remember him going like, maybe I should pick some up.
Yeah, but I think to go bring my rambling to a nice tight little package, I really do think that maybe the best way to give advice is to just not, and instead maybe frame it as a question. Be probative. Ask, what makes you think these cards are better for your list than these cards, and maybe sort of ask why instead of being like, hey, what about these cards? Like suggesting it, like being more questioning than declarative.
For sure. Yeah, I think leading with questions is a great way to, first of all, just understand somebody's deck better. I think regardless of whether or not you're giving feedback, getting an idea of what's going on in there, if you just saw it in action, was that not what was supposed to happen? Was that what was supposed to happen? Is their deck's goal just maybe a little bit more abstract, or maybe a little bit less ambitious, or less different than what you might expect. So I think it's good to get kind of an idea of what somebody's intention is, and then see if that intention is matching up with the reality, and see how happy they are with that. I think that's generally a good place to start in figuring out whether it's worth trying to help somebody out.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot during my streams too, where someone will be like, I have a really hard time finishing the game here, closing out the game. I love everything about this deck, but I just can't get it to end. And that will be the sort of jumping in point for the deck. And I'll sort of probe through the list, and I'll make a little show of it because I'm the streamer. But then I'll sort of suggest some finishers, and then some people in the chat will be like, oh, but like, look at this cool value engine you could add to this deck. You already have 2 of the 3 cards. And I'm like, well, that may be true. That isn't really the problem we're looking to solve here. The deck already functions fine for this person. It's just the closing the game aspect that they're having an issue with. It's nice to have that in the footnotes, right? To have the suggestion in the side. Ultimately, if someone approaches you or says they have a certain problem in your deck, and you're sort of giving advice that isn't curbing that problem, it's sort of I think it's more of a trying to not show off per se, but like trying to like, oh, look at this, I'm a cool deck builder too, instead of coming from a place of helpfulness.
Yeah, do the knowledge flex for sure.
Do I do this accidentally? I'm just like thinking.
No one is perfect. All right, for real. No one is perfect. And
we're also not describing some like terrible crime or anything.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, no.
We're all passionate about this game. Come out and they'll be like, oh my gosh, you need to finish for this deck, of course. But have you considered this value engine loop that you can add to this deck? Like, that's like totally fine and fair. It's just like when someone comes to you with a problem, you don't like show off some cool toys that don't fix their problem, right? I mean, it's fine so long as it gets there in the end, but
Yeah, I was just thinking I was at my LGS on Friday playing some Commander, and I was like, I feel like I was talking to a player and like suggesting some like card from Jumpstart or Foundations or some new card or something. And then I'm like, is that me just giving like unsolicited synergy advice that's not very useful? But it's more like, have you seen this card that got printed that's in your theme?
Yeah.
What do you think? So I don't think like the guy was upset about it or anything. I feel like maybe I'd do that a lot. I talk a lot during games.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge yapper too.
Oh, we know. That's why you're one of our podcast hosts.
That's your certified role. You have a little badge.
Yeah, no, this has been great. I finished the burger I was eating.
Perfect. What's the 1 to 10 on the burger?
So I went to Carl's Jr. and I got the El Diablo. which has jalapenos and jalapeno poppers on the burger.
Okay. Jalapeno poppers on the burger?
Yes.
Okay. Is any of this jalapenos on burgers are good if they're pickled? To me, was any of these elements pickled, or was it just like cooked jalapenos and raw jalapenos? Just like
No. They were pickled. They were pickled.
Good. Yeah, sounds good.
It's fine. Whatever. It's a fast food burger.
Yeah.
It was alright.
That's fair.
I haven't been to a Carl's Jr. in like over 10 years, so it's kind of interesting to see that they had random stuff. I like spicy foods, and this was not very spicy. It was just jalapenos.
Yeah, I'll occasionally go because I have one on like the halfway point of a long drive I do with reasonable regularity, but that's the only reason, and that's I think the only Carl's Jr. I see ever.
Yeah, they're not that common.
Sorry, we've totally derailed this.
Yeah,
Mostly me.
I am curious if you guys can remember the best piece of advice that you've gotten for your decks, just like from YouTube comments, stuff like that.
Honestly,
and finish this topic on a high note, sort of.
Yeah. So I think I remember in some video, I had asked for ways to gain life for my Heliod control deck, and somebody recommended the card Riot Control. Riot Control, I'll pull it up. It's 2 and a white for an instant. You gain 1 life for each creature your
that card's
opponents
interesting.
control.
Yeah, it's like a fog with gain.
And prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn. Which is super funny because I had a game on stream the other day where me and one player was attacking with like a ton of myriad creatures. Long story short, he had like 12 creatures, 3/3 flyers with myriad in play. So he attacked and everybody was swinging out. I was like, sweet, Riot Control, I'm going to gain like 30 life and I don't take damage, but it's only a fog for me. So you guys still take all the flyers.
Oh my gosh, Trinket Mage singing the praises of a fog.
That's pretty good.
It's life gain. I needed life gain. That game was crazy too. Not to derail this too much, but one of my patrons had a insane deck. It was what's the Bant guy that gives double strike and has Exalted?
Rafik? Rafik, yeah.
Yes, he's playing Rafik. This is a Rafik color hack, land hack deck. So he's playing Urborg and Yavimaya. And he's playing cards that care about how many swamps are on the battlefield. So there's an Angry Mob. I'll read Angry Mob because nobody knows what that card is.
It's the one. Yeah, that's a staple creature type that gets reprinted reasonably. Like it gets +1/+1 counters when things die.
No. You're thinking of
Unruly Mob.
Unruly
Shit,
Mob.
I am.
Angry Mob.
I don't know what
is
I'm talking
2
about.
white. It's 2 white for a human with trample. It's a 2+ star, 2+ star are its stats. During your turn, Angry Mob's power and toughness is equal to 2+ the number of swamps your opponents control. And same with the toughness. So it's a 2/2 on everyone else's turn, but on your turn, with Urborg in play, it's a 2+ the number of lands your opponents have collectively.
And it's a white creature with trample.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It was like a 26/26, and then he was like, attack with Rafik, give it +1/+1 in double strike.
That's great.
That deck was awesome. It was such a cool deck. Shout outs.
That's wild.
He has a spy kit deck as well. Every time he's on stream, he comes out with something crazy. But yeah, Riot Control. This was a great advice. Whoever suggested that for my Heliod deck, good choice. Great life gain. I like it.
Okay, so the best type of advice I get is recommendations for cards I know about, but that the little goblins in my brain are telling me not to put in my deck. And one example of this,
Cyclonic Rift.
no, the goblins are correct about that one. One example of this is Escape Protocol in my Shroom cycling deck.
Oh, who told you that one was good?
A couple different people, and I've played several games since adding the card, and it's so goddamn strong.
Yeah.
Escape Protocol, to be clear, is a card. It's kind of similar to Astral Slide. It reads, whenever you cycle a card, you may pay 1 colorless mana. If you do, exile target artifact or creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. So I didn't add it because I did not want to pay the 1 mana. I just that sounded like a really obnoxious thing to need to do. I hate paying 1 mana for things. That sounds terrible.
But
and
it
I
comes
added
back
it
right away.
It does, and the card is amazing. And literally, the first game I played with the deck, I played against a Elishnorn Mother of Machines deck. So there was a stacks piece for my whole deck in the command zone, and I broke parity by getting Astral Slide and Escape Protocol, and Astral Sliding the Elishnorn, and then Escape Protocoling my guys to bring them back a bunch. And literally, the first game I played with this card that I'd excluded for like a year, it won me the game easily. So people telling me the cards I already know about, but that I just don't want to add because I'm stubborn. Those are good suggestions.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and say right now, I have gotten good advice from people online. It's not all like, horrible advice or anything. One of the best recommendations I got was Tyar Jubilant Brawler for Farrakha.
That is sick.
Yeah, this is a Planeswalker 3 mana, 1 black green for 3 loyalty Planeswalker Tyvar. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though they had haste, so the 1,000-year elixir sort of static ability. You could +1 to untap 1 target creature, or you can -2 to mill 3 cards, and then you can return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, what does this do? It's self-mill. It can untap cards like, specifically, the big one is Sanctum Weaver, but I have an Arbor Elf package in the deck as well to make multiple mana off a single dork. Thirdly, it can recur something small. But the most important thing is the static ability that Tyvar has. It works with Insidious Roots or Enduring Vitality, which let my creatures tap for mana. And all I need then is Tortured Existence with like Insidious Roots. You pay a black, tapping your creature token in the case of Insidious Roots, and you do the discard shuffle where you discard a creature, you bring back a creature with Tortured Existence. You make a plant, and you put a +1/+1 counter on that plant for each plant you control with Insidious Roots. And then you tap the plant you just made because it has haste, and you do it again. So this is an infinite creature combo with a piece that's just independently good in my deck, which is just like crazy good value. And I just completely overlooked it because I'm mostly looking for creatures in my Farrakha deck. It's so hard to add a non-creature to this deck. I have 45 creatures in this deck, and it's already like, it already feels like too little. But Tyvar's kind of broke the barrier on that one. I think it is a genuinely pretty good addition to the deck list.
Yeah, there's some cards that just have like a weird little selection of abilities that just like line up perfectly for a deck, and it's always fun to find one of those or get suggested one of those and go, oh my gosh, how did I miss this? I mean, I missed this because why would I know about this card? But thank you.
Before we move to the question zone, I guess in line with this advice thing, I'm going to ask the audience here to give me some advice, and we can rate the quality of it. I'm working on a new deck. I'm going to say, I don't want to give away everything because I haven't come up with all of the things I need, but it is a deck that will play Astral Slide. We are cycling and discarding. I am in Mardu Colors, and it is tangentially inspired by the Shroom deck. It is not an artifact deck, though. Give me your best cycling discard synergy in Mardu Colors, and we can see how good that goes.
Ooh, that's fun.
We can see how well that goes. Excuse me, English.
See, that's fun because there was the Gavi precon that had red, white, blue. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in those colors. My Shroom slide deck is 1 color off of those. It's Esper, so it drops red for black. And you're playing a different one off from those where it drops blue for black, which I find kind of fun.
All right, on to the question zone. If you have questions for us, you can write them here in the YouTube comments. Just put the words question zone in there somewhere to help us find it. You can also put it in the Spotify comments, and we will check there as well. Or you can tweet at me or Elk, our Twitter handles are in the description, so you can follow us there and tweet questions there. All right, first question comes from Laurel Harris. Question zone. I have trouble cutting cards from my deck for new cards. What decision-making frameworks should I use to make this process easier?
Yeah, so I actually sort of made a video about this recently. My most recent video that I'm blanking the title on, Dang it. I'm terrible. I'm an awesome podcast host. My most recent video, how to make impactful commander decks, went over this a little bit. Mostly what I feel is good grounds for cutting. Do you often feel bad drawing this card? Like, ooh, this is rotting in my hand. Ooh, I late in the game, I top deck this. I'm not really feeling it. Or like, basically what I argue for in that video is you need to search for cards that have impact soon after you play them, or if not immediate impact when you play them. It's fine to have a few Phyrexian Arenas kicking around, right? Cards that require a little bit of time for value. But if your deck is mostly these sort of things, it's going to lead to some sort of clunky gameplay sort of patterns. There's more advice in the video, but this is the first cards I would look for cutting, are cards that take a while to accrue value. A little bit is good. And in fact, it could be great of the first copy of Phyrexian Arena, but you don't want to get inundated with these cards where you only draw them over the course of the game. And because the later you draw these cards, the worse they get. Phyrexian Arena on turn 7 is not as good as a Phyrexian Arena on turn 3. And so you kind of want to keep those cards to a minimum, not draw them as much in the late game where they become potentially dead. This is why I favor things mostly like Night's Whisper, things like this, where you can immediately just dig 2 cards deep. Because they're also live late in the game as top decks.
Yeah, I think the just intuitive, does it feel good to draw it? Is it frequently useful? Does it feel good? I think is a really good one. And then my other piece of advice is just, I like to kind of cycle in and out of decks that I am updating. So sometimes I will just kind of put a deck on the back burner, either in terms of playing. Usually it's both in terms of playing or in terms of updating, that I'll just kind of leave a deck for a couple months if I'm having a good time with some other decks. And then I will come back to that deck and I will sit down and I will go, okay, I'm going to look at this. I am going to, be a little bit merciless and cut some cards that I feel maybe a little bit strongly about, and see how that goes. And I think just being willing to take a break from a deck, come back, and then just commit to, poking at it a little bit with the knowledge that if you do something and you end up not liking it, you can toss that card back in. It's not permanent. And I think being able to cut something that might feel important or essential with the knowledge that it can come back in if you want it later, is really good and can be a really good exercise, even if the card doesn't stay out permanently.
I think when new cards come out, I usually just kind of cut the things from my list that have been underperforming. I think, especially as of late, because I've been recording stats for my videos, and I can see I lost 4 games in a row with my Heliod deck. I should probably see what new cards came out that might fit the theme. So I feel like when I'm adding new stuff from a new set, my framework is just think about what has done the worst for me, kind of like what Elk said, what feels bad to draw, and try and go from there. I feel like additionally, this obviously gets a lot harder the longer I have a deck, and since I take apart and scrap decks all the time, I feel for me, I suppose it's kind of easy because my first rendition of something is probably really bad and I've played it twice and I'm going to take it apart anyway. So I think it's really just keeping at least some sort of mental tally of this card that I have in here has been underperforming, and trying to remember and figure out what are the cards that need to be cut or can be cut, I suppose. Our next question comes from the Spotify comments, which I now have access to. Monado NA99 asks, question zone, as 3 deck hipsters, how do you work with deck ideas that are not very well supported? or have a small amount of decent cards.
You need to really start defining your decks based on sub themes in this situation. I feel so. I'm trying to think of a good example. I think attractions might be like a prime example for this. Maybe Most Dangerous Gamer is a Golgari commander that opens an attraction quite frequently. I forgot the exact stipulation for Most Dangerous Gamer. Most Dangerous Gamer is a 4-mana 2/2 Death Touch Golgari legendary card, Human Gamer Guest. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you open an attraction. And whenever you open an attraction, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Most Dangerous Gamer. And whenever you claim a prize of an attraction, you destroy target permanent. Attractions are very niche, but they're artifacts. That's a thing you can lean into with cards like Sarenth Steel Seeker, a card that belongs in basically any any green deck that can make a plentiful amount of artifacts. It has +1/+1 counter synergy a little bit. Dice rolling synergy is one that comes up with attractions, right? You could definitely run some dice rolling cards. Look into those. Death Touch, you can run some sort of maybe Viridian Longbow in this deck, right? So sort of you need to examine the nuance of the card. I also did this personally in Farrakha, where she makes 1/1 snakes. I was just trying to find any amount of cards that synergize with her activated ability. And you get a large swath of options for that. They're enchantment creatures, so they work with Constellation. They have power 2 or less, so they work with Snarling Gorehound, right? This card that whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters, you get to surveil one.
I love that card.
Yeah,
it's so good.
They're 1/1, so they work with Skull Clamp. They're tokens, so they work with Convoke, right? I was just trying to branch out with as many different things that work with Farrakha's activated ability. The fact that the snakes are 1/1s, the fact that the snakes are enchantments, the fact that the activating Farrakha involves you exiling a card from your graveyard, i.e., a card leaving your graveyard. So cards like Insidious Roots, Defiled Crypt Cadaver Lab, both which have triggered abilities when cards leave your graveyard. That is sort of the lens I took looking at Farrakha. So it's not just looking at like, what does this one deck do? I want to build a Mentor deck, right? And just only building with Mentor. You need to branch out into those sub-themes that synergize well with the deck's niche, like, oh, I only have 10 cards to work with theme.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
How do you work with deck ideas that are not very well supported or have a small amount of decent cards? Do you want me to answer first?
No, I have something.
Okay.
I keep a document that I throw all my stupid little deck ideas in, and like all the fun cards that just like catch my eye, or all the like fun combinations of cards that catch my eye, and I will just like loop through that document like once or twice a month just to see if I can kind of put some puzzle pieces together and figure out how to kind of fit some things together, because I think that tends to be the best way to go, is to try and fit the niche synergy into some other kind of broader shell. So that's my little trick that I use.
I'm gonna give the ugly truth here. Tutors. Just play Tutors. I think it is silly that people are like, oh, this goes against the spirit of the format. No. If I have one version of an effect like Sunforger, I should have Tutors to help me find it. As opposed to, like, if they printed Sunforger and 20 very similar cards, people would then be like, oh, well, whatever, you can put, one of each of those in your deck. No, just play Tutors. Just play things that search for the cards that you need. When you're building your jank, silly deck around a very small subset of cards, play cards that search for those. That's the good thing to do. And if you're worried about Tutors being like, oh, all my games are going to end the same, I'm just going to combo, in the same way, then don't put combos in your deck. Boom, problem solved. And if you don't want your deck to be like, I'm consistently, playing around these few cards, then I think you're not building a deck that's built around a small niche mechanic or something like that, Then you probably are playing something else that wouldn't, make sense for this advice or for this question. So, yeah, I would just say play Tutors. If your funny thing is an artifact, you're good. There's so many ones that are like cheap and accessible. If you're in black, it is not budget friendly, but there are many tutors in black. And if you're in green, there's a couple of, good creature tutors that are not super expensive either. Time of Need searches up legendary things or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe just legendary creatures.
Classic CEDH players tutoring tutors, searching for Sunforger. Classic.
That is me.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, what if I mystical tutor for, enlightened tutor to like grant my Sunforger?
Yeah,
Which is a tutor.
Yeah, this comes up in Techathol, and I think the correct answer is maybe a mix of both. Of what I said, what Trinket said, what Snail said. You can lie in wait. You can sit on these sort of synergies that you're interested in and wait for more support to come out in future, or you can search for mechanics that are tangential and that uplift the niche mechanic that you want to play with. Or thirdly, you can run tutors. That's what I did in Techathol. I didn't want to move much past proliferation and charge counters. I built it as a charge counter combo deck. So I have a ton of artifact tutors in that deck to find the artifacts I'm looking for. And in fact, I have a video about my Techathol deck as well. But anyway, no, I think a mix of all three of those are actually like any one of those could be the correct answer.
All right, Lemon Lime God asks, question zone, will you say trans rights?
Yeah, trans rights. Yay!
Of course, trans rights.
Trans rights.